Hey everyone, so it is time for another reading vlog, and today I'm coming at you with a Elantris reading vlog. So in 2021 I'm going to be rereading quite a lot of Brandon Sanderson, and I'm also going to be diving into Mistborn Era 2 for the first time. And so I decided that I wanted to do dedicated reading vlogs for all of those rereads in 2021. So this is the first one, the Elantris one. So I am going to keep these ones spoiler free. However, if you are somebody who wants to dive into a book knowing close to nothing about a book, I would still say go away now, because I am going to be discussing what I'm reading. I'm just not going to give any sort of real spoilers about plot developments, but I definitely will be discussing some of the major themes that are being discussed and some of the minor plot points that I don't think are really to be considered as spoilers for this story. But so Elantris is the first book that Brandon Sanderson ever published, and it is kind of considered to be his weaker book, but I first read this when I went to the US. It was kind of an audiobook that I had with me because I didn't take any sort of a physical book with me, and so it was basically the longest read that I had during that holiday. And it was also one of the first times that I really delved into audiobooks, and I had a great time listening to the audiobook for Elantris. And so I don't really see why people consider Elantris to be his weaker book. I definitely think that there are better books in his Cosmere. I definitely think that I like Mistborn a lot more, and I like Stormlight Archive a lot more, for example, but I don't necessarily see what is making people say that Elantris is his sort of like weakest book, the weakest thing that he put out there. So it's going to be interesting during my reread of this to kind of see if I pick up on certain things that I find annoying or that I find are not as well developed in Elantris as they might be in his later books. Apart from that, I want to be picking up on early clues, because for Elantris I actually do remember some parts of it quite well, because a lot of times I have a very bad memory, so I can easily reread a book and find a lot of things in it that I didn't remember. And so for Elantris, I'm sure that that's going to be the exact same, but there are definitely certain things that I know the resolution to this story. I know how this story ends up in the end, so a lot of it has stuck with me quite well. I don't know whether that is because of the audio format. Who knows, maybe I'm better at retaining information when I've processed it audibly than I am when I've had to process it visually. So who knows, I don't know, but in any case, I do remember some of the bigger plot points of this story, and so it'll be interesting going into this reread, being able to see the evolution to get there take place. Apart from that, I think Elantris has some very interesting thematic that it dives into that I definitely want to be exploring a lot more during my reread at this point in time. But so in this one, we're looking at the fallen city of Elantris. The Elantris used to be revered as gods by the people in the Erelon society. They could do no wrong. They could do these massive they had these massive powers and could perform what basically counted to miracles. However, one day this all came tumbling down. There was a massive rupture that happened, and the Elantrans lost their powers and started to kind of transform into shades. And so at the beginning of the story, the crown prince of the city of Kai has actually just become an Elantris, and thus he is banished into the city of Elantris. We're not just following Raiden, we are also following Raiden, who is a priest from a different religion trying to convert the people of Kai. And then we are looking at Serene, who was going to marry Raiden, but she ends up in the city of Kai, having just lost her future husband, having to kind of use her political prowess to kind of try and steer the city in the direction that she thinks it needs to go in. So, time to finally talk to you guys about Elantris. So I've actually gotten quite a bit of the way already through Elantris at this point in time. So I've done the first part of Elantris, but that basically means that I'm over halfway through the book, so I haven't really been that great about catching up to you guys with my thoughts on Elantris, but I will be going through some of my notes that I have on the book. I will be showing some of them on the screen as well, and some of the, you know, annotations within the book itself. Now within the book I just annotate with like post-it marks with tabs on the side. I don't really underline or anything like that, but you know, it will still be clear what I'm referring to, hopefully. And then this year I'm totally invested as well in really maintaining a reading journal to kind of write down my thoughts about this process. But so for Elantris, I think it is most interesting to look at the 3 different perspectives, because even though there is an overlap between the 3 storylines, and as far as I've gotten into the book now, they're definitely starting to overlap even further, I do think that we're looking at some very interesting different thematics, at least, with all these 3 different characters. So the 3 perspectives that we're following is the perspective of Raylan, the perspective of Serene, and the perspective of Raythan. So these 3 perspectives will always be changing one another out. So in the perspective of Raythan, that's the first perspective I'll talk about. I think most of Raythan's chapters are a little bit smaller, so we could definitely say that like Raylan and Serene are the main focus, but Raythan is definitely a very interesting perspective to follow on, and he has a very interesting dynamic in part of the story. And actually Raythan's part of the story is what really stuck with me about Elantris, because it's very much a story about, you know, religion and about the need for a division between religion and politics, for example. So in Belgium, where I grew up, it's always been like one of those big grounding principle is the idea of the division of power between religion and, you know, the real executive powers. So it's always interesting in that perspective, for example, to see people who are in power in the US use religious rhetoric, because for us in Belgium there will really be a no-go, you know. Religion is something that should not be part of politics, or at least in the way that I've been raised that is the case. And so this one definitely tells a story about religion in politics, because Raythan is definitely somebody who, in trying to spread his religion, will use political power, will use military power. Any means goes, as long as he is able to spread his religion even further. His big goal is definitely to have his religion be the one remaining religion, and that in part has to do with, you know, one of the beliefs of this religion, which is that once everybody within the continent, let's say, has converted to this religion, then only then will, you know, the big god of this religion descend down onto Earth and inhabit Earth alongside with its followers. So it is that motivation that is making this religion be so aggressive, so assertive. At the same time, it's also a religion that highly favors ambition, that highly favors, you know, bold moves and things like that. So that is part of what Raythan's motivation is. However, a big part of what I found interesting about Raythan's storyline is the sort of contrast between his way of conversion and his belief system, or the way that he is following through on his religious belief, versus that of D-Love. So D-Love is very much an extremist. D-Love is somebody who believes to the core, to the extreme, in what his religion is preaching, and so he will take no prisoners. He will go all the way in order to embody his religion and make sure that people follow his religion. People who aren't following his religion, in his sense, really are inferior. They are heathens, they are barbarians, they are hurting his religion. And so when his religion is condemning the Elantrians, for example, that also means that he has pure hatred for Elantrians as a result. And so it's interesting to see this play of power, these manipulations between these 2 characters who are part of the same team, but at the same time they're often working against one another. They often disagree about certain paths to follow, certain manipulations that are needed in order to further their religion. And so that's a very interesting element that Brandon Sanderson has introduced into the story, and that's one of the things that I really took with me from my first reading of this book. The main thing that I remember about it is the fact that we are looking at this sort of religious power play, at this sort of religion trying to dominate the world in order to be able to spread its religion. So, not going to go further into that, and there's definitely also more to what is being explored within Raythan's storyline, but that definitely sets up that sort of part of the story well enough, I think, considering that this is a spoiler-free reading vlog. Moving on to Serene. Serene, like Creighton, is an outsider moving into this society. Basically, actually, all three perspectives are perspectives of outsiders. Nobody is in their set environment. And so Serene, she is from Teo, she has lived her life there, she has been brought up with their ideals, with their religions, and while a lot of it overlaps with the culture and the religion of Erelon, she does definitely notice that, definitely when it comes to like the role of women, Teo definitely has a little bit more of, like, has gone a little bit further in that than Erelon has done. And so she will actually be using that sort of like prejudice that Erelon society has against women to her betterment. She will kind of be playing these sort of like poor, innocent, gullible female in order to get her way. And she is very much somebody who kind of meddles around all the time, so the people who really know her are kind of exasperated whenever she sets her mind to do something, because they know that she will get into trouble. And so she kind of sees Creighton as her opponent and will try to thwart him at every point of the way. I very much like with Serene's storyline, first of all, that we have this female who is so politically motivated. The most political player within this book is a female protagonist, which I absolutely love. And the fact that we're looking at her trying to tap into that, you know, potential female power, you know, not just in the terms of her going to the women and looking at the women's stories and the way that women are talking about their husbands as a potential source of political information, political power, but also really activating these women and making them see that they do have opportunities outside of what society has been offering them so far. What I do find annoying with Serene, and we have to take into account somewhat that this book is the first published work by Brandon Sanderson, and so it dates back from some time, and it is something that has been done a lot within fantasy that, you know, that I don't condemn as much in fantasy that it has been published, like, I don't know, 15 years ago or something like that, than I do if it were published just now, is the fact that Serene is very much one of those, unlike other girls. So even while she's coming from Teo, where, you know, they are saying that there is more of a role for females than there is in Erelon society, a lot of her sort of background story and a lot of her struggle is about feeling like she has never really been accepted, like she's always stood out. In Teo, she first of all stood out because she is a lot taller than all of the other girls, and so it's a lot about how that impacted the way that she was viewed, but also about the fact that she was a lot more forward and the way that she was mocked for certain of those things. And in Erelon, her perspective is also often contrasting her with the way in which other women are acting, with the way other women are being portrayed. And so even Raiden at times is also saying like how she stands out and how she's unlike any of the Erelon nobility that he has ever seen. So I don't very much like that aspect of it, the idea that she needs to be different than every other woman out there in order for her to shine on her own, and that she's kind of showing the women the way, you know, that women need to be shown the way by this sort of like exceptional woman that she is. So that's kind of a minor qualm that I have with that. It's just something that I notice every time that something like that is put into the story, and just kind of makes me roll my eyes a little bit and sigh a little bit at the fact that this is an element that is so prevalent within fantasy. It's definitely something that I want to keep an eye on when I'm going through more of my Brandon Sandersons. I haven't really noticed it in Stormlight Archive, for example, so I think he's definitely moved past that sort of portrayal of women, but you know, it's always interesting to keep an eye on these sort of things. So in Serene's parts we definitely get a lot of the political manipulation. She's the political center point of this story. And so, as I said, all of these perspectives are outsiders, and so even though Raoden is from Erelon, he is from the city of Kai, he is the crown prince of the city of Kai, he is the outsider because he immediately moves away from his home setting to the city of Elantris. And whereas the city of Elantris is of course like so close to the city of Kai, it is definitely a foreign setting because there are only rumors about what Elantrian society is like. So he is, like the other two characters, an outsider perspective that is moving into the city of Elantris, getting introduced to its culture, to its society, and kind of and who is upsetting the balance. So with Raoden, a lot of what I particularly take out of the story is the chronic pain representation. And now, mind you, going into that I need to clarify that if I'm going into disability representation, I'm moving into it from a perspective of somebody who has a disability, but not all disabilities are alike, obviously, just the same as not all experiences of people with any sort of queer identity or with a different color are going to be the same. But do mind that if I'm talking about disability representation within this one, I do have some sort of chronic pain in the sense that I have muscular dystrophy, which is giving me some sort of pain almost every single day. So in that sense I call myself a chronic pain patient, but I've never really looked into what the exact definition of chronic pain is and whether this would fall into that. But I do definitely think that across all forms of disability there are certain experiences that are shared, or definitely certain experiences that you can relate to, but it definitely doesn't say that from a muscular dystrophy perspective, for example, I can fully talk about, you know, somebody who's in a wheelchair, for example. I don't have that same experience to be able to talk about that on that level, so do take that in mind. But so Raoden is an Elantrin, and Elantrins basically cannot heal, but they can also not die. So basically, if they are injured in any way or shape or form, they will feel that pain forever. So they are kind of the extreme of a chronic pain patient. They are people who have to deal with pain constantly. It never goes away. And so a lot of people read this disability representation into the story, and it's definitely there, but we also need to be wary of taking it to extremes. You know, this is definitely a fantasy interpretation of chronic pain, so we should never fully consider it as being an accurate portrayal of chronic pain. I think it takes the concept of chronic pain and tries to work with it, and it can be a little bit, and in that sense, if you look at this representation as being chronic pain representation, it can be a little bit ableist to see the message that Brandon Sanderson is trying to portray with his chronic pain representation, because basically what Raoden is doing, he's giving these guys purpose. He's giving the Elantrins purpose. He's giving them a vision in life. He's tapping into their passions, into their skill set, in order to set their mind on a new goal, on a new task. And with that, as a result, these people aren't feeling the pain anymore. They aren't feeling the pain as accurately in any case as they were before. And the message there is that if you have a purpose in life, pain will go away. So obviously, for a chronic pain patient, that is way too simplistic of a vision. Yes, purpose and a vision in life is definitely going to purpose and a vision in life is definitely going to help you overcome pain, or going to help you, you know, fight through the pain, are going to help you deal with the pain and still, you know, go towards these goals that you have in life. But the way in which it is formulated within the story doesn't really work in that sense of the word. And so Raoden is actually somewhat of an exception in his new plan, his new path, because he himself, while he has a purpose, he wants to improve circumstances in Elantris for the people around him. While he has that purpose and that vision, and his mind is constantly occupied with how he's going to achieve that goal, how he's going to manage all these people who are now following him, how he's going to manage his resources, how he's going to deal with the opposing parties, he himself is suffering severely from the pain that he's feeling. So clearly he either hasn't found his purpose yet, or it's clearly the case that it isn't as simple as all of that. Maybe part of the problem is that he knows what he's trying to do, whereas he's making these lives for these other people so much better without them really knowing what he's done there, without them really knowing that his goal was to try and make them feel the pain less by giving them another directive, by giving them another goal, whereas he himself knows that that is part of what he's trying to achieve, and so the cure doesn't work as well in his case. Now Raoden is sort of like a typical protagonist that Brandon Sanderson often has. He is kind of the Kaladin of this story, you know, this sort of like entrepreneuring, undertaking person who rather than seeing problems everywhere, he looks for solutions. He isn't really staying, he isn't really complacent with the way in which the situation he's living in is, with the way in which these people need to live. He doesn't really see the hopelessness of life in Elantris. He tackles the problems head on and makes sure that there is improvement possible, and that automatically leads people to follow him and to have hope because of him. With Raiden we will also be tackling the problem of Elantris, and I love the problem of Elantris, I will say. I won't go into anything when it comes to that because that's major spoilers, but that's the, I think it's the one Brandon Sanderson book where I have the most recollections of how the sort of magical system works, and you know, the way in which that resolves towards the end, because it taps into something that I personally am passionate about, so I guess that is part of the reason why I can remember it so well. And this time around, with rereading it now, I am also checking out the Aeons more, because so this magic system works with Aeons, so these are kind of like rune symbols, let's call it like that, so it's very much this sort of pictographic language that I don't know whether you can see from this distance. I'll have a click to insert it if not. But so they're all of these symbols that are made off of these elements. It very much reminds me of Chinese language, which is something that I studied myself, so I would definitely see that it's probably following those same rules. It also seems to be the case because at times it's referred to that, you know, the length of a character, the order of a character is important, which is definitely the case as well with Chinese. But so whenever a Aeon is introduced, I definitely do go to this list at the back to check them out, which I didn't do the first time because I didn't have a physical book at that time, and I definitely like that. It's definitely a sort of like enrichment to the experience, and I would definitely highly encourage you guys to do it as well. When we're looking at like names are often a combination, like names often have a certain element at its center, a certain Aeon at its center. Like Raiden's Aeon is Spirit, and his other name within the story will be Master Spirit. Serene, for example, has the Eni Aeon, which means wit and cleverness, and we definitely see that represented within her personality. So I'm definitely paying attention to that a lot more, as well as there's an element to the story that I remembered to some extent, but that this is basically the second Cosmere book that I've read, and so overseeing this element be there in Mistborn, be there in this book, being there in Stormlight, I'm definitely quite curious about Cosmere possibilities for that element. So yeah, I'm definitely enjoying my reread for this book so far. At this point in time we have, like, I think some 30 pages ago or something, Serene and Raiden finally met, which I always love. I always love. Brandon Sanderson uses this quite often. He always has multiple POVs, and I'm always excited about those POVs meeting one another at a later stage within the story. And so we now have Serene and Raiden meet. However, Serene is not aware of who Raiden is, and Raiden doesn't tell her, which is another thing I really like. It kind of reminds me of like You've Got Mail, which is a movie that I have way too much love for, considering the fact that it really is just like a light rom-com, but I love that sort of aspect of, you know, a dynamic between two love interests where one of the two is fully aware of the identity of the other, or of the sort of, where one of the two is like fully aware of the identity of the other, whereas the other one doesn't really know. And so I really love exploring a dynamic like that. And so I've been really enjoying that part. I've also been really enjoying the fact that, which I've kind of forgotten, that, you know, Serene is kind of on guard around Raiden. She doesn't really know what his game is, she really doesn't know what he's trying to achieve, and so she's also kind of thwarting him, kind of working against him. And because, you know, these two should actually totally be on the same side, it's kind of humorous to see that. It's kind of humorous and devastating at the same time to see that, because the way in which she is like kind of working against him does have big implications for what he is trying to achieve. So yeah, that's where I am right now. I'm definitely going to attempt to update you guys a lot more from this point onwards, so that you can follow along with what I'm exploring through the rest of this story a lot more closely. So it is Sunday, it's the third day of the Grid readathon. I have not done a whole lot of reading today, but the only reading so far that I've done today has been in Elantris. So I am currently at the 460 page mark, so I am about 90 pages, no, about like just under 100 pages away from the end of Elantris. So I do need to read a chapter of Don Quixote still today in order to make sure that I don't need to like rush this later on in the month. But then I think I'm going to dive into Elantris and maybe even finish it still today. We've just kind of gotten past a part of the story that I'd really forgotten about. You know, I vaguely knew that this was going to happen in some way or another because I did remember certain elements that took place in that part of the story. Cannot really spoil anything, but I'd totally forgotten how that ended up happening. So I've very much enjoyed going back into that part of the story. What I will say that I haven't been enjoying about this part of the story is there's kind of a lot of like with the romance between Raiden and Serene. I said earlier that I liked the fact that, you know, Raiden is aware of who Serene is and Serene isn't of who Raiden is, and that I kind of like that dynamic. However, what I don't like is a sort of like miscommunication trope that is kind of going on here, or you know, that whole aspect of Serene not being like other girls. So also here, Raiden, when he is like reintroduced to her again at some point, he's also said like, her wry wit made him smile, her intelligence intrigued him, and her personality encouraged him. After 10 years of dealing with women whose only apparent thought was how good they looked in their dress, a state of forced obtuseness led by his own weak-willed stepmother, Raiden was ready for a woman who wouldn't cower at the first sign of conflicts, a woman such as he remembered his mother being before she died. Now, I find that quite annoying. You know, I'm already happy that it says after dealing with women whose only apparent thought was how good they looked in their dress, at least indicating that probably what men's opinion on women is quite shallow, and it is quite, it might not match the reality of what is going on in women's head. But this is not the only instance of these things being said, and Serene definitely on her own side also uses that sort of idea that she is different from other women from time to time, and that is annoying. But you know, I think I said it earlier, this book is published 15 years ago, so I'll allow for it. I wouldn't allow for it in a recent publication by Brandon Sanderson, but this is kind of annoying me at this point in time, as is the miscommunication trope. And so there are certain things that are taking place within this story where I'm like, would have liked to see that go a little bit differently, which is not my usual experience with Brandon Sanderson. So is this the reason why people consider Elantris his weaker work? Perhaps. I don't know. I don't know why people consider it his weaker work. This is probably but this is probably going to be the reason why I will consider it his, like, my least liked Cosmere book by him. But so yeah, apart from that, is there anything else I can go into without spoiling at this point in the story? Probably not. So I have finished Elantris. I actually finished it a couple of days ago already, but so I still needed to kind of round off this reading vlog. So I won't go into too much, of course, because, you know, we were getting towards the end of the book, and, you know, in a non-spoiler reading vlog, I can definitely not give away too much neither. But so Brandon Sanderson is very much known for what is called his Sanderlanche. Basically, he is often, a lot of people have the experience that his books are slow, very slow at the very beginning, but they are like super speedy towards the end. And the super speedy part towards the end is definitely something that I can say is definitely true. But I personally also don't really feel like they are slow to start. You know, they take their time setting things up. But I've never had the experience where at the very beginning of the book I'm like, nothing is happening. But I am also, of course, quite a character-focused reader. I don't really need plots, so with that in mind, that might also just be part of the reason why I don't have that problem personally. But so the Sanderlanche is definitely a case, and that's definitely also something that is enhanced through structure. He definitely creates the Sanderlanche through structure, because all of the, like, because, you know, this might not hold up for all of his Cosmere books, because I haven't necessarily checked it for them all, you know, I haven't necessarily zoomed in on that aspect of the writing style, but you know, he will normally have just like one POV per chapter, and then we are moving between different POVs. This one actually moves in a very structural way, so it very much moves in a cyclical way, because we will always do Raiden, Sereni, Raiden, Raiden, Sereni, Raiden, Raiden, Sereni, Raiden. But then towards the end, when the Sanderlanche hits, that structure is broken, that structure is changed, and within one chapter we will move between multiple POVs, also POVs that we haven't had a first-person perspective from up until that point in time. Meaning that you're going from a structure in which one chapter is one character, and so we follow that one person throughout the entirety of the chapter, seeing everything that they do, to a structure in which we are jumping between different people, between different locations, so that automatically, of course, picks up the pace, that automatically speeds up the pace at which the story is unfolding. And so that definitely enhances and creates that sort of Sanderlanche that he's very well known for. And so that definitely results in a very thrilling and a very engaging experience, a very exciting reading experience towards the end of the books. It is also often linked to sort of emotional movements, linked to one of the central POVs. So he will take one of these characters, bring them to the like lowest point, bring them to the brink of despair, and then when that Sanderlanche hits is when, you know, things start turning around, there's hope again, there's determination, and so things start unfolding rapid fire. But I will say that in the Sanderlanche it also became clear that some things that, you know, I read about that were super disturbing, and I was like, how could I forget that? How does my brain not remember these things? I read this book 3 years ago, no, not even 2.5 years ago or something, is when I first read Elantris, and I thought that I remembered Elantris very well. And I will say that when it comes to certain elements within this book and to the overall plot and to, you know, the different character lines and things like that, I remember it quite well for my doing. But, you know, how I could forget certain parts about that final sort of Sanderlanche sequence, I don't know. But it is definitely clear that I am a linguist at heart, because part of this story has to do with the learning of languages, because the Elantrians used to have this sort of language, the eons they were called, which they used them as their sort of like tools to create magic. And throughout this book we'll kind of be exploring that language, and we're kind of looking at the way in which that language works, the rules of that language, which I love. And it's also that part of the story I remembered completely. Every part of that, every element of how that language worked, I still remembered. But I couldn't remember something about some gruesome things that take place at the end of the book that definitely have quite an impact. So yeah, I really love that ending. Overall, really love Elantris. Really love, even though I've said some negative parts about the physical disability representation, for example, I do love the fact that it's there, and I love the fact that he centered a story around what could be interpreted as a disabled character and gave disabled characters their own voice, their own story. It is very much a story about how they are kept apart from society and they themselves find a way to improve their circumstances. So if read as a disabled text in that way, it definitely has a lot of impact, a lot of power as well. And there's just this tiny little element of that whole idea that all you need is purpose that doesn't really work for me, but a whole lot of the disability representation does very much work for me. Same goes with some of the negatives I've had about the way that Sereni is not like other girls, for example, and those types of things. You know, they are not distracting from my enjoyment of this book. I highly, highly enjoy Elantris. It is a 4-star read for me because I do have certain problems with aspects of the novel, so it's not a 5-star like a lot of Brandon Sandersons are for me. But enjoyment-wise, for example, it is definitely up there. So I would still highly recommend this to you guys. If you're kind of doubting because you hear people saying that it's Brandon Sanderson's weakest book, you really don't need to doubt. You know, it's got maybe a little bit more plot holes here or there. It might not always hold up to you know, the standards that some of his later books might have. There might be certain elements that you might not fully love the way that you might in some of his later works, but all in all it's still a great work overall. And so yeah, it's definitely, and it's a standalone, so it's easy for you to get into compared to some of his longer series, for example. So yeah, I would still highly recommend this one. And so you can see I still heavily tab this one and this is not like tabbing. There are a few tabs in here, like the yellow ones are world building tabs, for example, but that can also be world building that's just standalone world building. It's not necessarily linked to the Cosmere, but all the rest of them are definitely just about the themes that are presented within this book or nice quotes that I found within this book. So I definitely highly encourage you guys to pick this one up. But so yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know down below if you've read Elantris, what your thoughts are on some of the points that I brought up in here, or if there's something that you want to discuss, definitely let me know as well down below, and I will get back to you about that and we can have a little discussion about it. And I hope you enjoyed this video and see you guys for a future one. Bye.